Hello and welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and our main topic tonight, a 6-month retrospective. Israel just finishing the first half of the first year under the leadership of the Change government formed in June 2021. The current leadership rotating between Yamina leader and current Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Foreign Affairs Minister / alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid. Now, this government, to those who may have forgotten, is the first government formed after over a decade of leadership under former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which included 3 operations in Gaza, 4 different governments, 4 corruption charges, and 3 failed attempts at creating a new government. In any case, then, how did this new government fare so far? Who did it better, and what does the future entail? Here to discuss is legal counsel for the Halel Likud Forum and Im Tirtzu, Ziv Maor, and Jeremy Saltan, political strategist and director for English operations with the Prime Minister's Yamina Party. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Now, Jeremy, I'm actually going to start with you. You know, in a short sentence, how would you rate the government's performance over the last 6 months?
10 out of 10. Slam dunk.
I mean, care to elaborate then? It's too short of a sentence.
You said it, quick.
I did.
Look,
I did.
We were
able
to prevent having another election. If we hadn't formed the government when we did, we'd be right now going towards a 6th election after a failed 5th election with yet another stalemate. The polls are just showing that we'd be in the same place that we were before we formed this government. So that was very important. Another thing is being able to pass the state budget, having a government that works with ministers that can plan long-term instead of just waiting and living on a month-by-month basis. And of course, the third thing is being able to have a corona policy which is more pro-business and able to allow our economy to be in the position where it is, which is much better than practically anyone else that is within our feed if you look at others within the OECD within our range.
All right, Ziv, we have a 10 out of 10 here from Jeremy. How do you respond?
Well, 10 out of 10, it's almost as vain as if the Prime Minister wrote a book about how to defeat a pandemic and then did the exact opposite when he was in charge. Well, when it comes to the public approval of this government, you can positively see that both Yamina Party and the other, let's say, conservative or right-wing foot, which is New Hope, both are struggling to even get into the new Knesset according to the polls. Now, in terms of policies themselves, you can see several elements. You can see, first of all, tax increase, extreme tax increase, and it's not just a tax increase. This is a tax increase that represents or basically stipulates extremely progressive agendas. If you take a glimpse, for instance, about the sugar tax that is also applied for sugar-free beverages. If you take a glimpse into the plastic tax in a country like Israel, where there is no plastic recycling whatsoever, everything is just being dumped because of because of what it is. Taxes in increase, prices go up. Small businesses struggle to get help from this government during the corona crisis. This is on the economy scope. The other scope, which is extremely important to observe, the Israeli voter back in March 2021 said something very explicit about what they want Israel's foreign policy to be. They wanted to expunge the Palestinian agenda. The Israeli voter voted for a one-state policy and completely denying the agenda, the peace process agenda, and whatever that is implying that the Palestinians has a right for a state of their own on the land of Israel. This was the agenda of the voter, and it was quite explicit because this is also what the voters of Naftali Bennett and Gideon Saar wanted. Now, what this government is doing is the exact opposite. We see the Minister of Defense is meeting with Abu Mazen, with this Holocaust denier, with this supporter of terrorists within prison, and going directly against the policy that the Israeli voter wanted, and basically implementing extreme left policies in the foreign affairs agenda and going against its voter. Now, we remember that Naftali Bennett at the beginning is...
So, Ziv, I want to cut you off here, and I want to switch back to Jeremy real quick for a response. Jeremy, Ziv pointed to a number of different issues here, starting really
I'm happy to address each of them.
Well, he started really though with some of the polling right now, which is indeed showing that the 43% respondents said that they preferred the previous government over 36% who preferred this one. Similarly, 45% of respondents surveyed said that they prefer former Prime Minister Netanyahu over the current Prime Minister Bennett. How do you respond?
So let's talk about the polls. Let's talk about the economy, and then we'll go back and talk about the Palestinians. Because again, what I keep hearing is a bunch of stuff that really has no claim within reality. The reason we have to raise taxes, and everyone understands this, is because we had 4 elections in the last 2 years. And the reason why we had 4 elections in 2 years is Benjamin Netanyahu, who refused to go ahead and step aside. That's his right, but the reason that the taxes are going up are because we keep having more elections.
Well, sure
and again,
COVID
the reason
played a
we
part.
formed this government was to prevent that from happening. In terms of the polls, look, right now in the polls, we're at 9-10 seats. That's more than the 7 seats that we won in the last election. Yeah, that's not in the position that we want to be. But let's be honest and look at this Knesset. There's only 2 parties that are currently in double digits. You have a very fragmented Knesset with 12 different parties. You have 8 of them in the coalition. That's just the way that Israeli politics is today, that we don't agree with each other. Yeah, you have situations where you might have in certain polls certain numbers, but guess what? There is no poll that shows that Netanyahu and his opposition gets 61 seats to have a majority. There's also no poll that shows Netanyahu with an approval rating of over 50%, or anyone saying when it comes to suitability of prime minister that he gets over 50%. That's the position that we've been in now for 2.5, 3 years, where Netanyahu might get a very large chunk of what happens in terms of the vote, but he's never able to get over the 50% point to get a majority. That's why taxes have gone up. And if you want to talk about where the spending is, instead of the cherry picking that Ziv Maor is looking at, the majority of extra spending is going towards combating the coronavirus and defense spending to deal with important issues such as Iran. And lastly, on the Palestinian issue, it's clear to everybody who listens, even to Gantz and Lapid, that they understand the parameters under this government is that there will be no diplomatic process. And I understand that Ziv is upset that Benny Gantz met with Mr. Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas. But let's remember that Naftali Bennett is not meeting with Abbas. It's actually the last Israeli prime minister who met Abbas is Benjamin Netanyahu. So that's not a person who can go ahead right now and preach on that issue.
Ziv, many people, really, many people, a majority of sorts, as Jeremy insinuated, do prefer a different government. You know, if the government is so bad, if the polls are all saying that they're in Netanyahu's favor, why didn't Netanyahu win?
Well, why did Netanyahu win? Well, the outcomes of the past elections were pretty clear.
Sure.
Majority of Israeli voters.
So I guess the heart of my question is what's different today than it was, as Jeremy insinuated? What's different today than it was 6 months ago?
Well, first of all, we have an insight about what the other alternative, what the current government is able to do. Okay, this is what we have. This is what is different. Now, I'm familiar with the polls as well. And I'm familiar with the fact that in order to assemble this specific government, Bennett had to lie to his voters and to assemble a government with the extreme left, something he explicitly promised that he will not do. This is the fact. Now, as in terms of what the poll says, I see the poll just as there are several polls that doesn't even give Bennett the privilege of being a member of the Knesset in light of the extreme fraud that he committed right after the elections in the very act of assembling this government. Now, what Jeremy says basically is the reason that they have to increase the taxes is because of the consecutive elections. There is no connection between whatsoever. The actual cost of having election in Israel is not so high.
Wait.
It's not to the point of billions of shekels that have to be spent and to go down.
That's contrary to all the reports in the last few years.
No, but it's not. Well, it is contrary to many opinions.
Every financial report about the elections in the last few years showed that each election cost upwards of 5 billion shekel.
5 billion shekels is just about 1.5% of the state budget. And we're talking about tax increase of way more than that. Now, there are other costs. Okay, let's not forget for a moment that the COVID situation also demands increasing in tax. By the way, when you talk about 5 billion shekels, you have to deduct budget is not being increased during election time. So it's not actually, this is what the election costs, but there are savings that are a result of the election themselves. Now, another thing that needs to be understood, it's not Netanyahu's fault that there were consecutive elections. There were other people that he invited to his coalition and they declined. First and foremost, it is the fault and the entity to blame is the Israeli public as a whole that weren't able to decide. This is also something that needs to be acknowledged. But the fact is, it's not only the fact that they had to increase taxes. There are wise ways to both increase taxes and, on the other hand, to liberate the economy in a manner that will generate more economic action that will increase the income of the government without raising taxes. The type of taxes, the educational taxes, the progressive taxes, not in the economic meaning of the word, but in the political meaning of the word, trying to educate us to use less plastic when there is no recycling. Try to taxing electric cars because people are starting to use it and the government is no longer benefiting from the excessive tax over fuel. This is embarrassing. Well, taxing the sugar in sugar-free beverage just goes to the extreme lunatic approaches of this government. There are ways to increase taxes. There are ways to say to the Israeli public, listen, COVID cost a lot. The current government, the previous government had a lot of expenses, but trying to educate us to things that we do not believe in through the taxes, trying to mold us into those progressive molds in a manner that trying to, through the taxes, decide for us what is right and what is wrong. This is not taxation. This is an education process, a progressive education process that goes directly against what Naftali Bennett and his party promised to their constituency. And this is the last point that Jeremy said, that I myself, he named me for being quite upset of the meeting of Gantz and Abu Mazen. Well, this is not only me and not only a million other Likud voters. It is also those people who voted for Naftali Bennett, voted for a policy that goes against the progress of the Palestinians. Now, you cannot say that the Minister of Defense in Israel met with the chairman of the Palestinian Authority and say this is nothing. This is not the policy of this government. Now, Netanyahu, indeed, many years ago, met with Abu Mazen, set some terms for negotiation, demanded that Abu Mazen himself will acknowledge the existence of a Jewish state before going forward with any peace process, and Abu Mazen declined it, and since then there was no meeting between the two. Now, without this Holocaust denier, terrorist supporter acknowledging the existence of a Jewish state, the Minister of Defense of Israel is meeting with him in this very home under Naftali Bennett's government and leadership. Naftali Bennett cannot wash his hands from this action.
Jeremy Saltan, how do you respond? I mean, it does say something. I wouldn't say that the meeting between Gantz and Abbas is nothing. That much I would agree with.
First, just on the economic thing quickly, 3 national shutdowns is really what went ahead and hurt businesses. So it's quite rich to see someone supporting the previous government, which really devastated businesses, and then going ahead and picking out a few small taxes, that is the biggest thing that's the problem. And the macro thing of shutting down all businesses nationwide 3 times in the first 3 waves of Corona, pretending that that's much better than what we saw in terms of this government. In terms of Abu Mazen, guys, let's remember who Benjamin Netanyahu is. He's the guy who signed the Y Plantation Accords and gave extra percentages after Oslo and Oslo II to the Palestinian Authority. Benjamin Netanyahu is the one as prime minister who signed on to the Hebron Agreement and gave away a majority of our biblical city. It was Benjamin Netanyahu that voted for the disengagement in the Knesset. It was Benjamin Netanyahu that created the concept of building freezes. And again, yes, it was Netanyahu that had a diplomatic process based on the parameters of a 2-state solution, which he recognized in his supposed historic speech at Bar Ilan University of 2 states for 2 people, based on those outlines, and also releasing terrorists with blood on their hands, going ahead in the first 3 of the 4 waves that were planned during those Abu Mazen shuttle talks during the Kerry years. It's quite rich to say that any of that comes close to allowing your defense minister to discuss not diplomatic issues, but strictly security issues because of the specific coordination, the security coordination that was set up by Benjamin Netanyahu between the Palestinian Authority and the State of Israel. So it's important to keep things in proportion when it comes to that. What you have is a government with Naftali Bennett, where unlike the predecessor, we do not have a building freeze. We are building in Judea and Samaria. We do not have diplomatic talks with the Palestinians. And yes, there are talks in terms of security coordination, just as there was with our predecessor government led by Netanyahu.
All right, Ziv, let's talk a little bit more about the security apparatus. It sounds like you have a response already.
No, first of all, I have to say, in regard to the economy and the lockdowns, one thing that I'm willing to give to this government, unlike many of my fellow Likud supporters, is that the fact that I don't hold the current crisis against them. We are in uncharted territory, and this pandemic has a way of surprising each and every government in the world over and over again. Now, Naftali Bennett was vain enough to write this pathetic book of his about how to defeat a pandemic, and he's failing in this, but I can hold against him the fact that he wrote this embarrassing book. I cannot hold against him the fact that he fails to defeat this pandemic, because no one currently knows how to do that. Now, before there was vaccination, before Netanyahu's effort to bring the vaccination to the Israelis sooner than any other place in the world, the only way for governments to deal with this pandemic was lockdowns. There is no reason to assume that Naftali Bennett would have acted any different way. And even in his book, he recommends on lockdowns on certain aspects. As for the current crisis that we're seeing, it is what it is. This is the same way in any other place in the world. And I do not expect Netanyahu to maybe he would have managed it differently, but there is no guarantee that he would have ended up in any other results. As for security, listen, I live in Tekoa, which is in Judea and Samaria. I sense the tension with my Arab neighbors day by day when I leave my yishuv, when I leave my settlement and drive to Jerusalem. Now, I have no doubts on Netanyahu's good intention. I have lots of questions on his policy, on the Bar-Ilan speech. It has been a long time ago. His policy has proven to be indifferent. But what is important when you're talking about Bennett, that no matter how leftist was Netanyahu's policy, he never said that he will resign his government. He always clung to his seat as a last resort, as if this is what is important. And this is the idea fix. This is the main core of his government. They gave up on ideology in order to defeat Netanyahu.
All right, well, I want to switch now to a topic that we have not yet discussed. And Jeremy, I'll start with you. The topic is religion and state. And I believe that you actually might have some common ground here. But, how do you see the work of Religious Services Minister Matan Kahana?
I think Matan Kahana is the best religious services minister that the state of Israel has had in decades.
Well, he's certainly ruffling a lot of feathers. He's not. It sounds like he's doing things that are not a non-zero sum game here. That it's at the expense. At least this is what the ultra orthodox have been arguing, that his changes have been at their expense. Would you agree or would you disagree?
I think that the changes that Matan Kahana is putting forth are good for a majority of the Jewish people. They're good when it comes to the kashrut. They're good when it comes to conversion. They're good about trying to make sure that, yes, we have a Zionist chief rabbi as the chief rabbi of the state of Israel. Is that something that the Haredim are not happy about? Because traditionally, throughout every Likud government that we've had, we've seen that all of those positions have been sold out to the Haredim. Yes, you are correct. There is reason for the Haredim to be upset about that. And there's also a reason why the Haredim are the best friends of the Likud and Benjamin Netanyahu, and very much a very, very big part of the opposition that we see against this government.
All right, Ziv, do you disagree with that assessment?
I disagree strongly. 9 years ago, I was the spokesman of the chief rabbinate of Israel. I used to do the spokesmanship for the rabbinate itself. And back then, I had a minister of religious affairs. His name was Naftali Bennett. And there is a common line between Bennett's term as a religious minister and Matan Kahana. they do not know what they are doing. They do not understand the system that they are dealing with. Now, there are many, many things that I myself, as a Zionist religious, disagree with the Haredim about. There are many amendments that need to be taken in this complicated system.
And I think that everybody agrees on that.
The way that it conducts.
Right.
What?
Well,
yeah, everyone agrees.
Yeah,
on
I think
that,
everybody agrees that a reform is necessary. Just what the reform and how to do it is
reform
where
is too big of a word. For instance, everybody, what Matan Kana is doing and what Naftali Bennett did at the time, were handling themselves like there is a Hebrew expression. I don't know if they have, if there is an English equivalent, like elephants in a China store. They break everything. They do not stop for a single second to understand the consequences of their reforms about what they're doing. Okay, and this is the way it is. And I'm absolutely in favor, for instance, in adjusting the Rabbanut system in a way that it will be more friendly to non-Orthodox branches of Judaism in the diaspora. And there is a willingness in some element within the Rabbanut and within the current chief rabbis to have these dialogues, unless there are certain terms fulfilled. Now, these terms that are being denied by the non-Orthodox branches, streams of Judaism, these are the very ones that are being championed by Matan Kana. For instance, the issue of conversion. The question is not who is a Jew. The question is whether or not the citizens of Israel have the democratic right to decide who is not a Jew for the purpose of law of return. This is the question at hand. And the non-Orthodox establishments in the United States have their own opinion, which is negotiable, which is discussable. It's okay to have
none of that has to do with anything that Matan Kahana is doing. That is complete propaganda. Everything that Matan Kana is doing is within orthodoxy. You might prefer the Haredi way, but guess what? Religious Zionism, modern orthodoxy, that is within the spectrum of orthodoxy, not just in Israel, but around the globe.
Jeremy, I think that you and I can agree about what
I'm gonna have to stop us here. I'd love to continue this conversation, but unfortunately we can't. Jeremy, Saltan, Ziv Maor, thank you both so much for joining us again today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and everybody at home, thank you, of course, for joining us as well. Please tune in next time on Insider for more on everything Israel. If there's a topic that you'd like us to cover next, let us know about it in the comment sections online. And then for more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv and to sign up for our new streaming platform, ILTV Plus. I'm Aaron Porras. Until next time, be well.